this time. So let me shut up now and introduce you to Chuck here. Please welcome.
It's way too early to have a good exam, but we'll do a simple exam. We'll just pass those out at some point in the talk. I'm very pleased to be here. It's a wonderful program. And thanks, David, for putting it on. It's just a great service. As David mentioned, we've had some problems with the internet, and I had some clips I was going to show you, but I'm not going to try them because I'll probably crash the whole program. So we'll go forward with what we have. My topic is legal ethics and witness memory and modern neuroscience. And it's a fascinating area in the law right now, and it's a changing area, and it raises a lot of social issues, a lot of governmental issues, and a lot of challenges for legal ethicists such as myself. Let me give you the background, which is the rules that we deal with in legal ethics. And the primary body of rules that govern lawyers in Texas are the Texas Disciplinary Rules of Professional Conduct. Those are our basic rules of legal ethics. We have other sets if you're in federal court or in other states or in particular settings, but those are the core rules. And that's what lawyers are supposed to do and not do. Naturally, they have rules on testimony and truthful testimony. And lawyers basically, believe it or not, are supposed to be honest and provide only truthful testimony through witnesses. We have what we call the don't lie, cheat, or steal rules. Kind of basic, and you already know them. If you've got a moral compass, Rule 304 is a good example. A lawyer shall not falsify evidence, counsel, or assist a witness to testify falsely. Rule 804A3 is the broadest rule we have, and it says basically that a lawyer shall not engage in conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. So we need to have truthful testimony in courtrooms, right? Now, you've probably heard that that doesn't always happen in courtrooms, and it doesn't. Well, what do you do if you're a lawyer and you want to prepare a witness? You're going to have a trial. You've got to take a witness to trial. What can you do to prepare the witness? And specifically, what can you do to prepare the witness about what the witness remembers? Because almost everything we say about what happened in the past comes from memory, right? The Restatement of Law Governing Lawyers is a 2-volume treatise published by the American Law Institute, and it sets out basic core principles across the states of the United States that deal, in this instance, with the law governing lawyers. So it gets into legal ethics and legal malpractice and areas like that. And it has a wonderful section on preparing witnesses, and it says in section 116, under litigation practice followed really throughout the country, a lawyer may interview a prospective witness, may discuss the role of the witness and effective courtroom demeanor, and then here's the key for today, may discuss the witness's recollection and probable testimony, and reveal to the witness the testimony of other witnesses, and ask the witness to reconsider the witness's recollection of events based on that other testimony or other exhibits or documents. And we can discuss the applicable law that applies to the case and review documents and probable lines of cross-examination, and we can even rehearse testimony and can even suggest choice of words to make the witness's meaning clear. What happens to memory if you do all of that? We'll see. Here's a couple of, I started a couple of cases. These are reported court decisions that deal with problems lawyers got into or almost got into because of dealing with witnesses and preparing witnesses. Resolution Trust Corp is one I love to talk on. I speak to all the young lawyers who are licensed in the state. I have to go through a program and I do the ethics component. And this is a wonderful case because the lawyers here who got sanctioned had practiced 2 years and 3 years respectively in their careers. And they got sanctioned by being disbarred from the federal court, $110,000 fine, and removal from representation of probably the law firm was one of their largest clients at the time, Resolution Trust Corp, back when all the S&Ls had failed in Texas. And what they did is they allegedly showed a witness a statement and said, look at the statement and sign it. And the witness said, no, I don't think that's true. The witness complained, and the judge imposed these massive sanctions. And just imagine those young lawyers as they went back to their law firm. And the boss said, well, how'd it go over there in court? Well, you know, we got disbarred, and you got fined $110,000. You lost your biggest client. On balance, it was not a good day. Just wasn't a good day. But the good news was they got it reversed 2 years later. You know, they probably didn't get very big raises that first year, but they got it reversed. And the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said, it's one thing to ask a witness to swear to facts that are knowingly false. Can't do that. We know that. It's another thing in an arm's-length interview with a witness for an attorney to attempt to persuade her even aggressively that her initial version of a certain fact situation is not complete or accurate. Okay, what happens if we do that? If we aggressively try to persuade someone that their recollection, their memory, what they think happened isn't what happened? What does that physically do to their brain and their memory? As we'll see, it does a lot. Here's another case, EEOC versus Mitsubishi. This was a big sex discrimination case, and the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, was bringing the case, and they sent a letter to all the women who were involved in the class, and they said, look, here are some things you might think about. We have memory joggers. We've had a lot of reports, and these things might have happened to you. And then they had, so think about them, you know, consider them before you testify. And this is the actual quotes out of the enclosure that was in that letter that EEOC sent out. And they said, think about this category of sexual conduct, where there are jokes, nicknames, propositions, on and on, hostility towards women, anti-women statements, and then these detailed lists. Mitsubishi got hold of the letter and they said, this is terrible. This perverts the justice system. This is going to taint the testimony of the women. They produced one of the leading ethics experts in the country, Professor Rotunda, who said, this appears to suggest that the recipients should tailor testimony to get money. And the letter makes clear that if they remember these 25 buzzwords, they are likely to recover, and it creates the danger of false remembering. That was his ethics position. The EEOC Regional Counsel said, oh, come on, no. We always do this. Everybody does this. This is perfectly proper. This is what you have to do to help witnesses remember. We had ethics experts on both sides of the case from around the country, and they took differing positions. Which side was right? The trial judge held, no, Mitsubishi's motion to sanction the EEOC is denied. While certainly suggestive, the letter does not go beyond the bounds of privilege that attends every attorney-client communication. In fact, the court said, the memory joggers that Mitsubishi complains about are probably no different than what Mitsubishi does in preparing its own witnesses. So it's okay. Lawyers routinely prepare clients for depositions, focusing the client on the particular facts. We cannot ethically tell or allow clients to tell a lie, but suggesting the subject matter is surely what every competent lawyer does. Okay, so in those two cases, first case, those associates got hammered pretty hard for a couple of years till they got it reversed. Second case, there was no problem. Third case here, 2009, Fifth Circuit again. It didn't turn out so well for the lawyers. In this case, kind of an interesting case, this was, and the Fifth Circuit upheld a finding that the lawyers had improperly coached witnesses. And what happened was it was a Section 1983 civil rights case. Police they're driving down a neighborhood and they see some suspicious activity, they think, on a porch, and so they stop, like 5 or 6 police officers. Meanwhile, the neighbors are out on their porch and they come out with cameras and a video, and they start photographing this incident. Well, the police, one of them's undercover, he doesn't like that, so they go up and they end up in a tussle. And they arrest the adjacent family who are just taking photographs. They're not suspected of any crime. And that's dismissed, and they file a civil rights case. And they say, violate our constitutional rights. Couldn't arrest us like that. In the case, the defense is, well, we had a reasonable suspicion to detain the people in the neighboring house. That was the standard. And they hired the defense counsel in the Harris County Attorney's Office, hired a pretty good expert, Commander Rodriguez from Texas Department of Public Safety, to analyze the facts and help them prepare, help them determine whether they had a basis, that reasonable suspicion for what they did. Well, the commander, and this is a cardinal sin of the lawyers, the commander was allowed to meet with the witnesses without the lawyers being present. And so he had communications with them. He came up really with the details of the defense, that there was a high crime area, which could lead to suspicion, and that there was a danger of retaliation because of that photography of a potential undercover officer. And he really implanted that in the minds of those witnesses, and no one had said anything like that before. That all came out. What happened, another cardinal sin for a lawyer, the witnesses showed up, the officers, when they were giving their testimony, when they were deposed out of court, they showed up with notes from the commander, from the expert witness, that said that and tracked almost exactly what he had said. Came out, trial judge goes ballistic, sanctions the lawyers, and the Fifth Circuit, the district court, the judge said that Rodriguez, the attorneys used him to alter the officer's deposition testimony, and the Fifth Circuit said, well, there's not a lot of evidence, but there's enough to justify the sanctions that the trial judge issued against those lawyers in the case. So here's memory coaching, witness coaching, changing testimony that turned out really badly for the lawyers involved, and rightfully so. But Monroe Friedman, another ethics expert, classic work, states the principle, again, going back to that restatement that all lawyers know, you've got to prepare your witnesses. You've got to coach them. Woodshed them is what we sometimes call it. You always do that. You have a poorly educated day laborer who's hurt his leg. He comes in and says, well, it hurts. You know, that's not going to be compelling, persuasive testimony before a jury. How does it hurt? When does it hurt? When you wake up in the morning? What does it feel like? Is it shooting pain? And so lawyers will work with witnesses like that to develop and flesh out the testimony, one hopes truthfully, but remember the restatement statement, that a provision that you can suggest wording. And Monroe Friedman says, sure, you do it all the time. You have to rehearse it so you present it effectively, because if you're an ineffective witness, you're not going to be either believed or credited strongly by the jury or the judge. And then he recognizes the conundrum, the ethics conundrum. This is a highly creative process affecting what is remembered as much as what is forgotten. In fact, memory grows. The initial perception fades, but every time we recall an event, we must reconstruct the memory, and we change it each time we recall it. Lawyers should be aware that even straightforward questions of fact may affect what a witness remembers, and we'll see that. How you phrase what seems to be a very straightforward question can change very substantially the truth as the witness remembers it. And he says that presents the risk of prompting the client to testify falsely, but is necessary to develop it. And here's the reason why. When you go to court, as Michael Miller recognized in his study, when a witness does not demonstrate confidence or a strong memory, the jury tends to credit that testimony less. You know, I'm not really sure. I think it was like this. Well, that's not as strong as I remember it like it was yesterday. And it happened exactly this way, which is going to be more convincing. Pretty obvious. Okay, so backing up, what is this memory stuff anyway? Why do we remember stuff? Why do we forget stuff? How does it work? And that's what neuroscience is telling us more and more about, and really making this the ethical conundrums a little more difficult. So we'll start with this will be your first test of the day. Just listen to these words I'm going to read out. 15 words. Candy, sour, sugar, bitter, good, taste, tooth, nice, honey, soda, chocolate, heart, cake, eat, pie. All right, 15 words. By the way, most of us can only remember 7 things in a row. So that's why phone numbers are 7 numbers, and we remember them better in chunks, and that's why we break them up. 512-473-2375. Now, let's go back to that list. 15 words. How many do you remember? Take a moment and just tick them off in your mind and just see how many you remember. I didn't hear that, but...
could you repeat them?
No, I will not repeat them. I promise you I will not repeat them. I definitely won't. Just see how many you remember. You heard them. I mean, that was an event. You perceived that event, and now you have some memory of that event. So how many? Okay. How many remember all the words? If you do, you're in the wrong line of work. You should be doing something different. You've got an incredible, awesome memory. How many remember none of the words? Okay. If you remember none, you're also in the wrong line of work. How many remembered 4? Okay. 6? 8? 10? Looks like about 8, 9? 9. One very good memory. That's excellent. Okay, which of these words were on the list? Taste? Yes. Point? No. Sweet? Yes. Raise your hands on the last ones. How many? Sweet. No. Okay, about 70%, and that's because I asked you to raise your hands. If I'd had you raise your hands on each one, we would have gotten 80% on that last one, the word sweet. Sweet was not on the list. So 80% of you are liars. Whenever we do this test, 80 to 90% of the respondents get it wrong.
Because so many of the words had to do with sweet, so we're oriented.
Exactly. Your mind is storing that information. That's exactly right. Storing that information categorically. We work off of patterning, and our memories work off of patterning. And we have to organize stuff because there's so much stuff around us. And our minds automatically do that. So all of you who are perjurers and should now go to jail, you're like everybody else because that's the way the mind works. And that's one little piece of the memory. We're going to see several other odd things that the memory does. And what you need to think about is, well, how do we deal with that when we're preparing these witnesses to testify falsely, but to testify strongly to help their case?
Can you give that list out again?
Can we what?
Can you tell us the list? Can you tell us what that list is again?
No, I can't. I could not do that. That would be divulging trade secrets. If you email me, I'll send you the list. It's a fun test to do. Do it with your class. It's a lot of fun.
Chuck, I think our next year's lecture will have to include a session on the psychology of teachers and how much they got to get it right.
Yeah. Clearly.
How many of us cheated?
You know, I've done this talk several times. I've never had an audience that was this demanding. You know, this is good. Okay, so how does it?
Yeah. I want to ask you one question, and I may be confused, but as an attorney, if I come to you and I'm a witness in a car accident,
right,
and I say the car I saw was black, in the police statement it was blue, you as the attorney can say, now you remember it wasn't black, it was blue?
Well, what I can certainly do is show you if there's a police report, which presumably was based on the policeman's observation. I can certainly show you that. Now, you remember it this color, but the report says, is it possible it was that color? Now, think about that, and, you know, we'll work with your memory and see. And if you, at the end of the day, you say, no, I mean, it was, that report is wrong, that's your testimony. It's got to be truthful. I can't tell you to say, you know, I know you believe that, but that's just wrong. So just say it the way I'm telling you. I couldn't do that.
You can correct what I remember.
I can certainly help you to test your memory and to perhaps remember more details or remember the events.
Physical evidence with the person that you're trying to prepare for testimony. Like, you have a picture of the car.
Sure.
You say, look, this car.
Looks black or looks blue. Right. So how does memory work? Where is that in the brain? Where's your memory? What part of the brain is it in? Well, that's a good question. There's not really a complete answer today. But, boy, there are a lot of answers that have developed over the last 3 or 4 years, and they're pretty interesting. We know the cerebral cortex, hippocampus, certainly for short-term memory and initial memory, cerebellum. You got 100 billion neurons, basically, in your brain. They're connected. They're interconnected, like a quadrillion different synaptic connections, bridges between neurons in the brain. And the current theory for at least long-term memory is that when you remember something, you change your brain structure, physically change your brain structure. You perceive something, and if you perceive it enough that it's in there and stays in there, you're building bridges. You're creating proteins, and neurotransmitters are going back and forth, and the stronger you build that bridge, the stronger that memory will be, and the longer you will retain it. And that's kind of a core principle, but it's not by any means the full explanation of how memory works. There's a belief, a current theory, that memories actually are nomadic, that they migrate, starting in the hippocampus, which is sort of the short-term portion of the memory, and if they're going to be a long-term, you're going to remember it for years, then they're going to migrate over to the neocortex. And this is just, you know, kind of background. Great book, David Eagleman, Incognito, this year. A lot of fun. And he goes into the incredible complexity of the brain, which is just phenomenally beautiful and complicated, and points out that a single cubic centimeter of your brain has as many connections, those synapses, those neuron connections, as the entire Milky Way galaxy has stars. Single cubic centimeter. Daniel Schachter is my favorite memory guru. He is the chairman of the psychology department at Harvard. Love his books. Got 2 books, Searching for Memory, and then The 7 Sins of Memory, which we'll spend a good bit of time on. And I love those. And he says, well, what's this about retrieving memory? So you put stuff in there, and then you got to pull it back out. And it's like reconstructing a dinosaur from fragments of a bone. There is the snapshot myth, and that is, I have this experience, and I take a picture, or I take a video, and I stick it in a box in my brain somewhere, and then I try to recall it someday. Someone asks me a question, I pull it out and I look at it. Maybe the picture's faded, but I look at it and I see what I see. It's not like that. It's much more organic. It's always changing, and that's the critical part of it. One way to look at it is, how do you form memory? First, you have to have an experience, right? Perception. You've got to see something or hear something or feel something. Then you have to, so you have the experience, you perceive it, you store it somehow, some way, some portions of the brain, and that probably modifies your neuron structure in your brain, and then you retrieve it. You recreate the experience. And we'll talk into the details of that later. Did all of you have the little sheet that I handed out?
Yeah.
Okay. First question, are we blind? How many of you think you are blind? Nobody thinks you're blind? Okay. I'm going to show you you're blind. Okay. I'm going to show you you're blind. Great trick. Okay. Take your sheet and hold it up and have the plus sign on the left. Okay. And then close your left eye. And so you just have your right eye. And your right eye, focus on the plus sign. And then do this. Just pull this sheet very close, very slowly towards your right eye. And what's going to happen is the dot on the left will disappear.
Oh, wow.
It will go away. You will not see it. Now, did I just do something to your brain, or are you blind? Why couldn't you see it? The reason is you have a portion of the retina that is where the optic nerve passes through. That's a hole. It has no photoreceptors. You can't see. You cannot see from that portion of your eye. You don't know that. That was not discovered until 1668 by a mathematician named Edmund Marriott. And he just stumbled across it. I don't know if he was looking at plus signs or what he was doing, but he found it. That blind spot you have in your eye, you say, well, that's a little old blind spot. And play with it, when you get home, play with it, and you can have fun with your kids, and you get a free drink at a bar. People they're blind. But that blind spot's large enough that if you take the average size of the moon, it's large enough to have 17 moons if you looked at the moon. That's how big that blind spot is over distance. Okay, but notice something else. You have a blind spot. What did you see when the dot went away? You saw white. You didn't see darkness as if you were blind. You saw white. Why did you see white? You're blind, right? You couldn't have seen that. Exactly. The brain is filling in the reality for you, falsely. You can't see that. The brain put it in there. It created a false image that, I see. It's white, right? I mean, that's what you see. If you had to testify, you would say, well, I saw white there. No, you didn't. Vision is not in the eyes. Vision is in the brain. Perception, likewise, is in the brain. It's not in the stimuli. There's a fellow who is blind, who's the first man to climb Mount Everest. And he climbed it with a series of sensor devices that were connected in his mouth, because the mouth is a very good conductor with the liquids of senses. And he learned from the senses that came in to see the mountain. Just as a blind person learns to see words by feeling Braille, it's the stimuli the brain learns to interpret. He learned that the same way. People who are born blind and have their vision restored, maybe they have some problem in their brain that they fix, can't see. It takes quite a period of time for them to learn to see, and they can. But what's happening is the brain is learning a new language. It's got to learn to interpret all these stimuli coming in. Okay. Now let's go back to we got to testify truthfully based on memory. And memory starts with perception. It's difficult. This is going to be a wonder. This is the most exciting part of my talk, and it's on YouTube, and because the internet connection wasn't great, we don't get to show it. But I'll tell you about it, and I'll tell you where to find it, and you can go look at it. Change blindness. A lot of experiments with change blindness, and just go to YouTube later and put change blindness in and pull up some YouTubes, and you're going to have a great time. It's wonderful. This is a classic experiment, and it's one of the first ones you'll show up, or you'll find versions of this on YouTube. And what happens is, two folks are talking. I go up to a student on campus, on UT campus, and I say, I'd like the directions to Gregory Gymnasium. And we're talking, and the person's giving me directions. And then in the middle of that, two guys are carrying a sheet of plywood or a door, and they come between us. And when they come between us, I stand behind the door and move off, and another person who is behind the door, or the plywood, is standing there. Completely different human being. 50%, roughly, of the people who have that experience do not notice that they're now talking to a different human being. And you look at these videos, and they're just awesome, because, I mean, they're tall, short people, and male and female, and, I mean, people that look totally different. Because what's that person doing who's giving directions? They're playing a little video in their mind, and they're focused on that. And it's change blindness we don't see, because where is our perception focused? So when we see that crime happen, where is our perception focused? What are we going to remember? Tons of experiments on that. They're great fun. This is another one that you'll find if you do that same search, change blindness on YouTube. Another great famous one. And you have a circle of people passing the basketball. And so you have the subject. You say, now, what I want you to do is count how many times they pass the basketball, or the team wearing the white jerseys passes the basketball. And it starts. And in the middle of the passing, a guy in a gorilla costume walks among the passers, right in the middle. And he usually waves his hand and dances. And
These teachers aren't going to fess up. We saw that.
you saw it, okay.
Those of us that didn't see the gorilla admit we were in that 50%.
Okay, well, but it's 50%, and it's the same thing. It's the change blindness, and it's the focus, and it's the perception. Okay, and I think they've got one with a dancing bear, so you can see a little different one if you pull that up on YouTube. Shankar Vedantam, another great book, Hidden Brain, lots of fun. Focusing on any one thing is trivial. It's easy for us to do. Focus on that spot on the ground. But focusing on everything around us, impossible. Where are the shadows on the back wall of this room? How many lights are in this room? What does your foot feel like now, and how's it being held? Where's the tongue on the top of your mouth? We don't focus on all that stuff. That's all subconscious. It's all taken care of. But when I testify, I better be talking about something I focused on, right or not? Can I pull it up? Can I retrieve it if only I had subconscious awareness of it? Yeah?
How much training do police officers get in this particular field?
Great question.
They're the ones that are going to have to do the testimony, and they're the ones whose testimony is going to carry a lot of weight. I mean, I've actually had an attorney when I was with jury duty walk in and say, how many of, it was a juvenile case, how many of you would place the testimony of a police officer in this case
Right.
with the testimony of my client who was 16?
The short answer is none.
Wow.
What we're going into at this level of detail. Now, they do learn the observational techniques for an accident. When you go out to an accident, you look for this. You look for the skid marks. You look at that. You measure this. And they've got a sequence to go through. Another great place that comes up, and you probably already heard about it from your criminal law lecturers, is witness ID. And the new procedures that have come into play really since Janet Reno was Attorney General in the Justice Department. But I'll come back to that one. Okay, here's a great experiment. This is the coffee station experiment. Good one for you to do at your school if you have an honor system. And here's what they did. This was in England, and this, I don't know how this experimenter came up with this, but they had a little coffee nook, and it was a place where you'd put in a quarter if you got a cup of coffee, and if you got tea, you'd put in 15 cents and stuff like that, and a couple other little condiments. And they had a price list above the little table in the corner, and it said what you were supposed to put in. The experimenter got the idea, well, I think I'll pull off the internet a strip about 1 inch tall. And the strip, in one form, will have flowers, daisies, just a little 1 inch strip of daisies, and I'll just paste that to the top of the list. And then I'm going to do another one, and this other one's going to have a woman's eyes. And it's going to take just a 1 inch strip, and it's going to be a woman's eyes. And I'll alternate those week by week, and just stick them up there, see what happens. See if it has any effect on the honor system of paying for the coffee. And what they found is they collected 3 times as much money in the weeks when they had the woman's eyes watching them. But the cool thing was, at the end of the experiment, they asked the subjects, did you see anything different about the price list? And they all said no. Nobody noticed. There was even a strip up there, much less eyes versus flowers. And the reason what was going on, it's that subconscious. Your subconscious is doing all kinds of stuff. It's the major part of your brain functions. And it was watching. It was like, whoa, somebody is up there watching us, and we're going to pay today. None of those thoughts came into the conscious brain. Either the awareness or the I'm going to change my behavior because of what my subconscious has noticed. Shows how powerful the subconscious is. Now, what if you wanted to retrieve that memory? It's in there, right? How would you retrieve that? Eagleman in Incognito says that most of what we do, most of what we think is not under our conscious control. We are a rational creature, right? Wrong. Most of what we do is not a result of rational reasoning. Our rational processes come in and rationalize, so this is why I'm doing this, but most of what we do is a function of our subconscious. Here's tons of these experiments. Here's one where they have men ranking women's photos for attractiveness. They have side photos and three-quarter photos. The only difference in the women, and they balance them for traditional beauty and face and all that, is that the eyes are dilated in half the photos. The men all pick, and that's supposed to be a biological sign of sexual excitement. The men all pick the dilated eye women as the prettier women. And the men have no idea that the eyes are dilated. So if you really want to look beautiful, go to the eye doctor and get the drops. The men had no idea. No idea. The subconscious was governing pretty important stuff, the aesthetic sense and judgment and maybe relationships. Nolan Ryan, August 20th, 1974, California Angels versus Detroit Tigers, throws a fastball that's clocked at over 100 miles an hour. That takes 0.4 of a second to get from the pitcher's mound across home plate. Okay? Think of all that has to happen in that 0.4, and he got hit that day. There were people who hit that fastball. Light signals had to come from the ball, enter the eye. They had to pass through the neural circuitry of the retina. They had to go to the brain, activate the brain neurons, had to go to the motor portion of the brain, had to send signals down to the muscles and control those muscles to meet the changing flight of the ball. All of that had to happen in 0.4 of a second to get a hit. People hit it. It takes 0.5 of a second for you to do any of that consciously. You cannot hit a fastball at that speed using your conscious mind. And when you do sports, the worst thing you can do is once you get in the zone is start thinking about it. Well, my golf swing, now it's coming down here, and I think it's, my left, you do that, guaranteed you're going to foul up. You just got to go with it and let your subconscious, based on the training that you have of your brain and your muscles, take over, or you're for sure going to make a mess. All those questions I asked before, we just don't, all this stuff we're doing, we don't think about our heart beating, our stomach, whether our stomach hurts unless it hurts really bad. And most of what we do in life, we're doing on subconscious. Sometimes that's called the zombie programs of the brain. Okay, here's another experiment you can do. Yes, ma'am.
And this is going to be one of my questions at the end, but I have a lot of friends that have autistic children.
Right.
And like when you said that, the need-to-know basis, I'm one of those that sort of focuses on the weird stuff in my brain. Like I do notice what is that? How?
You're very weird. You're just a strange person. You're outside the bell curve of normalcy. You need help. You need treatment, and you sure shouldn't be in education. No, no.
I noticed my friends with
Well,
autistic
well,
kids
remember,
really focus on
remember
those
going back to
things.
that change blindness. Half the people notice.
Yeah.
And in that particular kind of experiment, they don't know why. And one of those YouTubes you'll watch, which is actually a little scientific explanation of that, they say, you know, we don't know. I mean, some people just do it a little differently, and it's something we're studying in the brain. Okay, so how do you steer a car? How many of you have ever steered a car? Everybody, okay. And if you're in a 4-lane road, and you've got 2 lanes on your side, and you're on the inside lane, and you need to move to the outside lane, to the right-hand lane. If I'm going along here, I want to move over there. Imagine now, put your hands on the steering wheel, okay? And I want you to move the steering wheel the way you would to move over into that outside lane, and then straighten out. Let me see you do it. You're going to turn it just as you would, and then you're going to straighten out. Okay. Everyone I saw crashed. Every one of you just crashed. That is not how you change lanes. If you did that, you would end up on the side of the road, you'd hit the parked cars, you'd run into buildings, you'd run over pedestrians. What you have to do, and your subconscious brain knows it a heck of a lot better than your conscious brain, is you have to turn like this, you have to turn back, and then you straighten out. Try it on your way home, but don't do it if there are cars around, and don't do it the way you did here, and let your subconscious brain do it. But we just don't know. Because if you just go this way and then you straighten out, oh, now I'm going that way. I've got to come back once I get over there. The subconscious brain is so powerful, and so much of our perception and so much of our actions depend on it. And we're going to do this memory stuff based on the subconscious brain. My favorite. Well, yes and no. I mean, the truth is, we drive subconsciously. Most of what we do, you know how you put on the accelerator, it's going to go down that far, and I know it does this, and then I'm going to move over to the brake. You don't say, I'm now putting my foot on the brake. That's 4 inches to the left. I'll now push down 2 inches, and that will slow me down. You know, it's just, we've learned it physically. The brain has learned it, and our subconscious just does it for us, thank goodness. Because if we had to think about it, we'd have a lot more accidents. One of my favorite books on memory, again by Daniel Schachter, is The 7 Sins of Memory. And for those of you who become mature and get gray or white hair like me, great book to read. It's both practical and it's fascinating. Here are the 7 sins. I'm going to run through the list, and then we'll talk about a few of them. Transience. Transience is forgetting with the passage of time. Absent-mindedness, blocking. It's on the tip of my tongue. I can almost remember it. Misattribution, what never happened. Suggestibility, bias, persistence. I wish I could forget that. That's the embarrassing thing. You know, it happened when we were teenagers. I'll never forget that. Why the heck, when I forget everything else, can't I forget that experience? Just the way it works. Okay. Transience is forgetting with the passage of time. Where were you when the O.J. Simpson verdict was handed down? This question was asked of California students the day it came down, the day after it came down by psychologists, and then 15 months later, and then 3 years later, and naturally the memories decline with time. Got those bridges in there, and those bridges sort of deteriorate, the theory is. Encoding elaboration. All right. The more elaborate you encode an experience, a thought, or perception, the more you remember it. Experiment. 4 words, 2 groups. The list is lion, car, table, tree. One group is asked, tell us which words were in uppercase and lowercase. The other group is asked, tell us which words are living or non-living things. Which group remembered better? The latter. Why? Because they had to think about it. You can just look and see if it's uppercase or lowercase. Is it living? Well, lion, yeah. Car, no. Table, used to be living, not now. But you have to actually do stuff with your mind. And that's really the whole basis of study and memory, is the more you can work with an idea or a concept, and the more you can build that bridge, the more times you repeat it, the more times you work with it in different ways, the stronger you build that bridge. And again, Eagleman really hits on this. Our memory, if you think about it, was visual. It was developed visually. We lived up until the end of the Pleistocene era with the brain developing 10,000 years ago with no books and no words, no numbers like we have now. Everything we remembered had to be visually or something we heard. We had much better memories, the theory is, much better memories. We certainly know that going back to the ancient Greeks and Romans, because it was an oral literature. If you wanted to remember it and recite it, you remembered it. How many of you now could know the Iliad by heart? Well, you know, people did. And they did it visually. And that's the great thing about this book, Moonwalking with Einstein, actually, is that it focuses on how you use the visual. The strength of your memory is visual. The strength of your memory is not written words. Guarantee. And the Baker-Baker phenomenon is one of the ancient experiments that shows that. If I introduce you to somebody named Mr. Baker, you might remember that, you might not, unless there's something noteworthy. Most of us have a hard time with names. That's a common name. If I introduce you to someone, this man's a baker, what happens in your mind? Well, does he wear a hat? Does he work with dough? And does he have, you know, flour on him? Very visual. You will remember that much more likely than you will that somebody else's name is Baker. What appeals to the visual is what works in the memory the best. And that's why all mnemonic systems, almost all mnemonic systems, are based on visual. It wasn't until the 19th century that we had written text that had spaces between the words. You couldn't read them because it's just these letters all together. So like the Torah. And we developed punctuation in the 13th century, tables of contents and indices. And then the theory is our memory started getting weak. Why? Google. I don't need to remember that stuff. I just need to know where to find it. Thank goodness we have Google. And so we don't memorize very much. And so our memories have become feeble because of that. Joshua 4, Moonwalking with Einstein, he was a young reporter, and he decided, hey, this would be cool to study the memory championships, United States and the world. And he did that, and he got to interviewing the gurus of memory, and they said, you could do this. There's nothing special about it. It's just technique. He said, no, I couldn't do it. And they said, sure you could. And I said, well, okay, I'll do it. So he took a year. He won the U.S. Memory Championship. And what he learned was these lessons about encoding, mnemonics, visual memory. One of the most powerful devices in memory contests that people use is the memory palace. The memory palace is simply a place you create, your own home, and you walk through it, and you put stuff in it. And that's a memory palace. And you know where it's going to be, and you know the sequence because you've developed that in your memory palace. These guys develop 150 memory palaces, and they put a lot of stuff in them. But the key is this. It has to be visual, powerful imagery. And the crazier and wilder and funnier and sexier the imagery is, the better you remember it. So, example he gives. You got to remember a list of groceries. I got to buy milk and eggs. Okay? That's kind of a silly little list. How many remember that? 3 hours later when I finally get to the grocery store. Well, I'll do a memory palace. And so on my front door, right in my front door, I'm going to put a milk. I'm going to put a bathtub. And I'm going to fill it with milk, old claw bathtub, as many sensory images as I can. And who am I going to put in the bathtub? I'm going to put Selma Hayek in the bathtub. And what's she doing with that milk? You can imagine what she's doing with that milk. And I'm going to really work with that image, and I will not forget milk when I get to the grocery store. I promise you, I will not. For some of you men, this is the only image you're going to remember from today. But I got eggs, okay? So for the woman, I got eggs, Johnny Depp. And so that's my next image. I go in my front door, and I've got a little foyer area there. So he's sitting on the floor, and he's juggling eggs, ostrich eggs. And they're each 3 foot in diameter. And they go up, and every third one breaks on his head. And this stuff that's my visual image. If I have those two images, I'm going to get to the grocery store. I've got my milk and eggs. I may not forget them for 2 weeks, but I've got them in my mind. And that's the theory of the memory palace and the visual memory and how the mind works to remember that. Post-encoding events, and David actually started you on this one at the beginning. What do you remember last night? What did you eat last night? Okay, and most of you knew. And a couple of you knew what you ate the night before. What did you eat 2 weeks ago? Who knows? The reason is the post-encoding events, I got to recall something. I can recall what happened yesterday. I might recall 2 days ago, but if it's a series of similar events, what happened at school, what happened at work yesterday, last Thursday, hard to do. So the post-encoding events affect our ability to remember. I'm going to move through here. David took some of my time, but I want to.
You're good.
I'm good. I'm very good, but you just took some of my time. Okay, let me just mention a couple of principles that I think are useful when you're studying. My daughter's studying for the bar exam this weekend, so I went back over this with her the last few weeks. Repetition over time. That also affects our memory. If I study 3 hours one afternoon for the test, and I'm doing the cramming, and I'm going to remember a lot because I studied 3 hours. If I take those 3 hours and I break them into 1 hour chunks, and I do it over 3 different days, a day apart, I'm going to remember much better. Much better. Because I came in, I rebuilt those bridges that were a little weak after the first day. I added to them, and the neurons were connected and reconnected and then connected a third time. And so that's how everyone ought to study. That's how witnesses should be prepared. Much better to have a witness in 3 times before trial, shorter periods, than 1 time the day before the testimony. The sin of blocking, I'll mention this one just because I love it. Blocking is the thing where I know the word and I can't remember. There's a plant that grows in my backyard and it comes out in the summer. Every year I forget the name of the plant. And every year what comes to mind is the name of another plant. And it always blocks the memory of the plant I'm trying to remember. Happens as you get over 50 with names, more and more common. But it is a universal phenomenon. There are 51 languages that have that exact expression, the tip of the tongue, or some version of that. And the most beautiful one, I think, is Korean, sparkling at the end of my tongue. And that's the phenomenon. Well, there's stuff that goes on in your brain that makes that happen in some instances. The ugly sister blocking. Take this experiment here where you have these words, apple, canary, robin, pear, crow, banana, other list goes on. And you first test, you give the subjects a couple of the words off the list. They now remember the list. The second test, you give a different set of subjects, you read the words, but you don't give them any clues. Who's going to remember more? The second group, not the first group. Why? Because in that list, for some reason, those words play a blocking role. And particular words do that. For example, there's these word pairs, red blood, food radish. Red's a great cue for blood. Just comes together, red blood. However, if you do red blood and then you have also on the list food radish, it's much more difficult for subjects to remember radish. For some reason, when you use a red word in your brain, it makes it harder to call up another red word on the list. Why? Nobody knows. It's just something weird about the way our brain perceives and remembers. How do we factor that into preparing the witness? Misattribution. The most famous example of that probably was the Oklahoma City bombing, 1995. You had John Doe 1 was Timothy McVeigh, of course. And you may remember for about 3 days we were searching for John Doe 2. And there were photographs put up, and it was on all the newspapers, and this guy who was square-faced, stocky, young, had a blue and white cap. All over the news. Where is John Doe 2? They finally went back and interviewed the guy where they'd rented the van at the mechanic shop. And he had recalled the John Doe 2, and what he had done is he had conflated 2 events. He had had a rental of a van a day before. And when all this happened, his mind misattributed and just stuck those 2 events together. There was no John Doe number 2, and they eventually figured that out. Sin of bias, lots of kinds of bias. Consistency bias we see in the law. If I have someone who has chronic pain, back pain, some days it's better, some months it's worse. And if I depose that person and take the testimony and I say, how's your back pain been over the last 6 months? The answer I get will tend to vary depending on how that person feels that day. It's just a standard principle. Politics. Ask your high school students' views on busing, then let them hear pro and con arguments. Their minds may change, and then ask them, well, what did you think before? They will tend to say, well, I have this new information, this is right, and what I thought before is what I think now. Consistency bias. Likewise with elections, you take one group the day before an election, you say, who's going to win? Close election, who's going to win? You get the numbers. Then you go back after the election, and you ask another randomly chosen group, who did you think was going to win? a lot more people were right in hindsight than they were the day before.
Not necessarily attributed to memory, but more the kids wanting to have the right answer.
Your brain wanting to have consistency. And they call it hindsight consistency bias. Egocentric bias. Okay, sentence suggestibility. That's kind of the big entree here today, because that's what we use the most in the law. 1992, there was an L.L.P plane crash in Amsterdam. Terrible trauma for the Netherlands. 2 engines failed, crashed, 39 people died, crashed into a big apartment building. Dutch psychologists did a study a while after that. They said, did you see the television film of the moment the plane hit the apartment building? 55% of the respondents said yes. They did a follow-up study. 66% more remembered it. And the people who remembered it, they remembered things like the speed, the angle of the plane coming in, when it burst into flames, all this wonderful visual stuff. The only problem was there was no film. That 55% or 66% lied. They gave false testimony on that memory test. Why? Because they had a leading question. They were suggested, did you see the film? Must be a film, right? They asked me about it. And because of the event, an event like that is so inherently visual when you describe it, you imagine it. You weren't there, you didn't see a picture of it, because nobody had a film at that moment of the apartment building. But you imagine it, and you make your own film in your mind. And so you've played that film 1,000 times. So you've got your own film. Suggestibility. False confessions. This is a famous Williams College experiment. They have students in the room, and the experimenter says, look, I'm going to read out a list of letters for you. And actually, two different groups they do it to. One group, I'm reading out the letters. One group, I'm reading out very fast the letters. And the experimenter says, but whatever you do, because you've all got your laptops there or your keyboards, type the letters. Whatever you do, don't hit the Alt key. Because we got a glitch in our system like the State Bar's got a glitch today. If we hit the Alt key, the whole system will crash. So don't hit the Alt key, okay? Starts reading out the letters, the system crashes. And the experiment says, you did it. I think I saw you hit the Alt key. There's a planted stooge, and the stooge says, yeah, I saw you hit the Alt key. And what happens is 70% confess in writing to having hit the Alt key. Now, there was nobody hit the Alt key because that was a totally made-up thing. 70%. Of the hurried group who were typing really fast, 35, all of them confessed. 100% confession under that social coercion situation. And a lot of them would give details of how it happened. You know, I was trying to hit the comma, and my little finger went over and hit that Alt key, I guess. Yeah, that's what I think I did. And they've made up details. So when you hear about, well, he confessed to a crime, under what circumstances did he confess to the crime? We can make almost anyone confess. It's almost impossible to not give a confession if you're put in the right circumstances. And these are pretty easy circumstances. Just, you know, you're in a room and somebody falsely accuses you, well, I'm wrong. Matt Quinson, you heard some of this. I won't go through it, but this is a wonderful identification testimony experiment, and they'd had 352 subjects, and they showed them a grainy surveillance film of somebody walking through a convenience store. And it was very fuzzy, and they said, well, this guy later killed a security guard. Now, here are 5 mug shots. Which of these guys is guilty? Which of these guys did it? All 352 pick out a shot, a photo. One or another, they all pick out a photo. Nobody says, well, I don't know, or nobody did. I don't see the guy. None of the photos were the guy in the film. But they were suggested which of the guys is guilty in these photos. The power of that suggestion is so immense. Elizabeth Loftus, I used her as an expert witness in the late 1970s, and she's one of the foremost experts on false memories. And one of the most famous cases she ever worked on was the Nadine Kuhl case, and it's been written up all over. There was a nurse's aide who had, she was getting psychiatric therapy because her daughter had had a trauma, and she was having trouble dealing with the daughter's trauma, and so she got psychiatric therapy, and the psychiatrist, as was de jour, de rigueur those days, used hypnosis and hypnotic suggestions to explore her memories. And here's what she remembered at the end of that process. She had been in a satanic cult. They had eaten babies. She had been raped. She'd had sex with animals. She'd been forced to watch the murder of an 8-year-old friend. She had more than 120 personalities, one of which was a duck. None of that was true, she came to realize. It all was the result of what the psychiatrist did, the therapist did. And he did, he even did exorcisms for 5 hours at a time. Case went to trial, gazillion psychiatrists testified, and the case was settled for $2.5 million. We used to believe, or people used to believe, some experts, that they could get you to recover those memories, not taking into account the immense power of suggestion. This is one of my favorite of Elizabeth's experiments, though. This is the impossible memories experiment. And in this one, it's true that the first 12 months of your life, you basically have no memories from that because your hippocampus is not developed enough to remember. You just don't remember stuff, 0 to 12 months. So what they do is they get subjects in, and they do a few little tests with them, and then they throw a ball to one, and they watch them catch it, and they say, you're really coordinated. We have found that in some instances, people who are really coordinated, when they were in the crib, in the hospital, when they were born, they had these colorful mobiles that circulated, and they went around in circles, and we think that is a contributing factor to hand-eye coordination. And we want to find out if you remember that. And so they took 2 groups, and one of them, they were hypnotized, did age regression, like in the Nadine Cool case. And the other group was just had guidic mnemonic restructuring. I want you to remember 10 years ago, when you were a teenager, now when you're a little girl, when you were in the hospital. I just want you to take you slowly back to that time. 50% of those who were hypnotized, 70% of those who were hypnotized recalled some infant memories. And 95% of the guided group did. And the kinds of memories generically they would recall were, well, there were like bright lights and doctors and babies crying. Yeah, big surprise, right? You're going to remember that. But 46% of the hypnotized group and 56% of the guided group actually recalled the mobiles. Yeah, I remember seeing those mobiles, Physically impossible to have that memory. Completely impossible. But they were suggested in the setup of the experiment that they could. Here are just a few experiments on the power of words, the power of suggestions. 2 groups of subjects are shown same photograph of a basketball player. Put the photograph, and the first group they say, how tall was that basketball player? And the average, the mean answer is 6 feet 7 inches tall. Decent height, pretty tall basketball player. Second group is asked, how short was the basketball player? The average or mean answer is 5 feet 9 inches tall. That's a short basketball player. What do we do to get completely different memories or perceptions? We change one word, tall or short. Power of suggestion. Headaches. Do you get headaches frequently? You get headaches occasionally. 2 different groups. Answer varies by a factor of 3. If we use the adverb frequently, 2.2 times a week. Occasionally, 0.7 headaches a week. One word. Subject shown a film of multiple car accident, 2 groups, questions about the speed of the cars. First one is asked how fast the car is going when they smashed into each other. Powerful dramatic verb. About 10.5 miles an hour. Second group, how fast were they going when they hit each other? Another powerful verb, but not as dramatic, 8 miles an hour. 25% change in speed. More than that. You changing one word. Changing the verb slightly. Another group, the same group. Did you see any broken glass? There was no broken glass in the film. It was over twice as likely that those who had the strong, powerful verb smashed would remember what did not exist. All right, now here is the most dramatic, though. This is a multi-car accident. One car turns right to enter a stream of traffic, causes a multi-car pile-up behind it. People watch 6 questions to 2 groups about 3 things that were in the film and 3 things that were not in the film. And the first group is asked, did you see A? The second group, did you see the? Smallest change in human language you can make, changing the article A to the article D. Differences in answers? Whether the item was present or not, the first group was twice as likely to say, I don't know, the A group. Second group was twice as likely to say yes to identify something as being present that was not even there. Power of using the article the. So, what do we lawyers have to do when we construct questions for a witness? I want to interview you and find out what you saw at the accident, or I want to prepare you for deposition, or I'm in trial and I want to ask you something about what happened. What do we have an obligation to do? We're going to change. We know we're going to change the way the truth is presented at trial based on minor suggestions, changes in language. Okay, the future. Big brother. I'll tell you just...
I want to hear about Seinfeld.
You want to hear something? Okay, Seinfeld. All right, excuse me. So here's what this was kind of elaborate experiment. What they did is they took these people who were having severe epileptic seizures, and they couldn't localize where the seizures were, so they couldn't treat them. Couldn't localize it in the brain. So they put them in a clinic, and they put in all these tiny, tiny electrodes, and they had to sit around and wait till they had a seizure. Then they could identify where it was. Psychologists came along and said, oh, this is cool. We can study how the brain functions. And so we showed them things, video clips of like Seinfeld, and then monuments, and then famous people or animals. And they studied the oxygenation patterns in the brain. Where is the brain firing when I show you the Seinfeld clip, or the Eiffel Tower, or an animal? And what they found is they're different for those three different categories. But what they found was, if I show that film, and I come back 3 hours later and I say, do you remember that Eiffel Tower? Remember that. Form a mental image of it. What they found is that the memory would have exactly the same brain oxygenation firing pattern as the perception. Same part of the brain is active when remembering as when perceiving, at least in short-term memories. They call it time travel, basically. You're just recreating the experience physically identically in that setting, at least. They also got, what they found out is there's about a half-second delay. Remember that consciousness back in the Nolan Ryan experiment? Half-second delay. And so what they could do is see the oxygenation pattern before the person had the image. They could say, oh, he's going to remember it. Half a second, he's going to see it. And he would. Okay, that was kind of the early experiments, way back in 2008. Then we got Jack Gallant, who is state-of-the-art. He's the guy. Taught at UT for a while, out in West Coast. He's done thousands of these experiments, and what he does is he puts people in a functional MRI machine, big MRI machine like you've seen on House, you know, where they put you through and remain still. And they study the brain flow and the neural firings, and they prepare voxels. A voxel is a three-dimensional pixel. It's a kind of a picture of what's going on in the brain when you see stuff. And then they prepare a code, an algorithmic code that they feed into a computer. So they show you an orange rectangle, and they see what your brain does. They show you Seinfeld. They show you a coral snake. And they take pictures of all of that when you see those, and they develop a code put in the computer. On objects, they've developed the ability to be 90% accurate. Are you looking at a hammer? Or are you looking at a house right now? I'll show you a picture, and my computer will tell us what you're looking at. That's how accurate they are in terms of being able to read your brain, read your thought, read your memory. But the cooler thing he's done, to me, the coolest one to date, is he does this. He puts people in this MRI. He shows them all of these films and visuals, and then he put 1,000 hours of YouTube into a computer and indexed it, and that's a huge amount. I mean, just tons and tons of stuff. And then what he would do is he would show the people, while they're in the functional MRI machine, a little clip or a photograph. And then he would, in real time, run that through his code with all the archive, all the database they have of things that might look like what they're seeing, and in real time flash a film or a photograph on the wall showing exactly what they're seeing, read just by the computer. And the first one they did was, one of the first ones they did was like an elephant. So they show a guy, an elephant walking in the desert. And the film, real-time film, is this big blob, looks not exactly like an elephant, a big blob, and there's dust or sand being kicked up just as the elephant walking through the desert. Here are photographs, and these are actual from his study, comparison photos. That's what they showed on the left, On the right is what the computer picked out to say what the person was looking at, simply by reading the neural activity. Second one, I guess that's, what was that, mushrooms? Third one, I'm not sure what that is. The fourth one, looked at the snake. I mean, that's what the person was looking at. The computer read the brain activity and said, this is what the person's looking at, and pulled that out of the archive. It was the closest snake they could get to match. I mean, that's brain reading. It's mind reading. And it's just understanding your neural activity. And that's right now. Now, push that forward 10 years and 15 years, technological development. We talk about that in legal ethics. What happened in the accident, I ask you, after I've done a baseline study of you, and I have you in court, and I have you hooked up? What happened in the accident? You say, well, they ran the red light. And I'm watching your brain. Oh, that's not right. Look, I can see. Look, here's the film of what you're really seeing. You know, what do you do with that in the courtroom or in a deposition? McDonald's is working on a functional MRI that's remote. Oh, I'm sorry, no, McDonald's is doing the experiment with food. And what they do is this. What's your favorite food? Artichokes or filet mignon. And they see what your brain does. And then they lay out 20 foods, and they say, what's your favorite food on the 20? And you say, this one. No, it's not. We can tell it's this one. And they don't have to ask the question, really, because they know through the brain activity what's your favorite. U.S. security agencies allegedly did that, started using that technology to interrogate prisoners. Lockheed Martin has a classified contract reported on 2 years ago to work on remote scanning. So instead of putting somebody in a great big old functional MRI machine in the hospital, I'll just have it on my little laptop, and I'll ask you a question. I'll look at your brain activity here. Oh, you say that's what happened? That's not what happened. Let me turn it around and show you the picture, the film, what's going on in your brain. Awesome Big Brother implications there, and could change, obviously, what we do in the law a great deal over the next 10 or 15 years. Adam Liptak wrote an article in the New York Times. He said, the line between permissible conduct and impermissible coaching can be like the difference between dusk and twilight. And you can see why this is such a rich area for legal ethics theorists and for lawyers to think about how we practice law and where it goes from here. Thank you.